The sun beat down mercilessly on Kingman, Arizona Territory, in the summer of 1882, and Sarah Foster stood a full 6 feet and 2 inches tall in her worn boots, making her the tallest woman anyone in town had ever seen and the subject of countless whispers and barely concealed laughter. She wiped the sweat from her brow as she carried another sack of grain from the general store to the wagon, her father too sick with consumption to do the heavy lifting anymore, and she ignored the pointing fingers and mocking comments that followed her everywhere she went. "Look at that giantess," someone whispered loud enough for her to hear. "Ain't natural for a woman to be built like that." Sarah kept her eyes forward, her jaw set tight. At 23 years old, she had heard it all before. Every dance she had attended ended with her standing against the wall, watching smaller women twirl in the arms of men who would not even meet her gaze. Every Sunday service meant sitting alone in the back pew while families filled the rows ahead. Every trip to town meant enduring the stares and comments that cut deeper than any knife ever could. She loaded the last sack into the wagon and climbed up onto the bench, taking the reins in her calloused hands. The wagon creaked under her weight as she settled in, and she heard another round of snickers from a group of women standing outside the millinery shop. Sarah clicked her tongue and urged the horses forward, leaving the dust of Kingman behind her as she headed back to the small ranch she shared with her father. The ranch sat 5 miles outside of town, a modest spread with a handful of cattle and a few chickens that scratched in the dirt yard. The house itself was little more than a cabin, but it was home, and it was all they had left after her mother had died 3 years prior. Sarah pulled the wagon up to the barn and began unloading the supplies, her muscles straining under the weight but capable of the task. "Sarah." Her father's weak voice called from the house. She set down the sack she was carrying and hurried inside, ducking slightly to clear the doorframe. Her father lay in his bed, his once robust frame now wasted away to skin and bones. Thomas Foster had been a strong man in his prime, a farmer and rancher who had carved out a life for his family in the harsh Arizona Territory. But the illness had taken hold 6 months ago, and Sarah knew with a growing dread that he would not recover. "I am here, Papa," she said softly, kneeling beside his bed so she would not tower over him. "Did you get the supplies?" he asked, his breath coming in short gasps. "Every last item on the list," she assured him. "I will put them away once I have seen to you. Do you need water? Something to eat?" He shook his head weakly. "Just sit with me a spell. Tell me about town." Sarah did not want to tell him about town. She did not want to relay the cruel comments or the pitying looks. Instead, she smiled and made up a pleasant story about Mrs. Henderson's new dress and Mr. Peterson's plans to expand his store. Her father listened with his eyes closed, a faint smile on his cracked lips. When he drifted off to sleep, Sarah returned to her chores. She unloaded the wagon, fed the animals, and checked on the cattle in the far pasture. The sun was setting by the time she finished, painting the desert sky in shades of orange and purple that took her breath away. For a moment, standing alone on the open range, she allowed herself to forget about her height and the loneliness that accompanied it. Out here, there was no one to mock her, no one to make her feel like a freak of nature. The next morning brought new challenges. Her father was worse, burning with fever and barely conscious. Sarah spent the day tending to him, placing cool cloths on his forehead and trying to get him to drink water. By evening, she knew she needed help. She would have to ride back to town and fetch the doctor, even though it meant enduring more whispers and stares. She saddled her horse, a tall mare named Bella who was one of the few creatures that did not make her feel oversized, and rode hard for Kingman. The doctor lived above his office on the main street, and Sarah pounded on his door until a bleary-eyed man in his 50s appeared. "My father needs you," she said without preamble. "He is burning up with fever." Dr. Morrison nodded and gathered his supplies. "I will follow you in my buggy. Ride slow so I can keep up." The journey back to the ranch seemed to take forever, but finally they arrived. The doctor examined Thomas while Sarah waited anxiously in the main room. When Morrison emerged, his expression was grave. "I will be honest with you, Miss Foster. Your father is very ill. The consumption has progressed significantly. I can give him something for the fever and the pain, but beyond that, there is little I can do. You should prepare yourself." Sarah felt her throat tighten, but she nodded. "How long?" "Days, perhaps a week if he is strong," the doctor said gently. "I am sorry." After the doctor left, Sarah sat beside her father's bed through the long night, holding his hand and praying to a God she was not sure was listening. She must have dozed off sometime before dawn because she woke to find sunlight streaming through the window and her father watching her with clear eyes. "Sarah, girl," he whispered. "Come closer." She leaned in, and he raised one trembling hand to touch her face. "You have been such a good daughter, so strong, so capable, but I worry about you being alone." "Do not talk like that," Sarah said, though tears were already streaming down her face. "Listen to me," Thomas insisted, his voice gaining a bit of strength. "This ranch, everything we have, it is yours, but it is not enough for one person to manage alone. You will need help. You will need to find someone." "Papa, no one wants a woman like me. You know that." "Then they are fools," her father said fiercely. "You are worth 10 of those small-minded people in town. Promise me you will not give up. Promise me you will find someone who sees you for who you truly are." Sarah could not speak past the lump in her throat, so she just nodded. Thomas Foster died 2 days later, just as the sun was rising. Sarah sat with him until the end, and when he drew his last rattling breath, she felt a piece of her heart break away. She was truly alone now. The funeral was small. A few neighbors came out of obligation, and the preacher said words that Sarah barely heard. She stood head and shoulders above everyone else at the graveside, feeling more isolated than ever. When it was over, she returned to the ranch and threw herself into work, trying to outrun the grief that threatened to overwhelm her. 3 weeks later, Sarah was in town buying more supplies when she noticed a commotion outside the saloon. A man was being thrown out, landing hard in the dusty street. He picked himself up, dusted off his clothes, and walked away without a backward glance. Sarah caught a glimpse of him and was struck by his appearance. He was not particularly tall, perhaps 5 feet and 8 inches, with sandy brown hair and a lean build. But it was the way he carried himself, with a quiet dignity despite being ejected from the saloon, that caught her attention. She thought nothing more of it until the following week when she was struggling to repair a section of fence that had come down in a windstorm. The cattle were in danger of wandering off, and she was working frantically to get the posts back up. The work required strength and skill, and while Sarah had the strength, the technical aspects of fence building had always been her father's domain. "Looks like you could use a hand." Sarah jumped at the sound of the voice and turned to find the man from the saloon standing a few yards away. Up close, she could see he had warm brown eyes and a weathered face that spoke of years spent outdoors. He wore typical cowboy attire, dusty and well-worn, and he held his hat respectfully in his hands. "I am managing," Sarah said defensively, though it was clear she was not. "No doubt you are," the man said easily. "But 2 sets of hands work faster than one, and it looks like you have got a whole herd thinking about taking a stroll." Sarah glanced at the cattle, who were indeed eyeing the gap in the fence with interest. She sighed. "I suppose help would be welcome." "But I cannot pay you." "Did not ask for pay," the man said, setting his hat back on his head and approaching the fence. Name is Ryan Keller, by the way. I am new to the area looking for work. Sarah Foster, she replied. This is my ranch. If Ryan was surprised that a woman owned the ranch, he did not show it. He examined the broken fence posts and nodded to himself. You have got the right idea, but these posts need to go deeper if they are going to hold. The ground here is too sandy. Let me show you. For the next several hours, they worked side by side. Ryan proved to be an excellent teacher, explaining what he was doing and why without ever making Sarah feel ignorant. He was patient and thorough, and by the time the sun was setting, the fence was not only repaired but stronger than it had been before. Thank you, Sarah said sincerely. That would have taken me days on my own, and I would have done it wrong besides. Ryan shrugged. Happy to help. You have got a nice spread here. Your husband must be proud. I have no husband, Sarah said quietly. It was my father's ranch, but he passed 3 weeks ago. I am sorry for your loss, Ryan said, and the sympathy in his eyes seemed genuine. It is hard to lose family. There was a story there, Sarah could tell, but she did not pry. Instead, she offered him supper as payment for his help. Ryan accepted, and they walked back to the house together. Sarah was acutely aware of their height difference, expecting at any moment for Ryan to make a comment or look uncomfortable. But he seemed perfectly at ease, talking about the cattle he had seen and asking intelligent questions about the ranch. Over a simple meal of beans and cornbread, Sarah learned that Ryan had been working as a ranch hand throughout the territory, moving from place to place. He was 28 years old and had been on his own since he was 16, when his family had been killed in an Apache raid. He spoke matter-of-factly about it, but Sarah could hear the old pain beneath the words. I have been looking to settle somewhere, Ryan said, mopping up the last of his beans with a piece of cornbread. I am tired of drifting. I want to put down roots, build something of my own. That is a good dream, Sarah said wistfully. I hope you find the right place. Ryan looked at her thoughtfully. You know, I could not help but notice that you have got your hands full here. A ranch this size is too much for one person. Have you thought about hiring help? Sarah laughed bitterly. With what money? My father's illness took everything we had saved. I can barely afford to keep myself fed, let alone pay a ranch hand. What if we worked out a different arrangement? Ryan proposed. I need a place to stay and food to eat. You need help running this ranch. I could work for room and board until we get the place profitable again. Then we could talk about wages. Sarah stared at him, waiting for the catch. Men did not make offers like this without expecting something in return. But Ryan met her gaze steadily, his expression open and honest. Why would you do that? She asked suspiciously. Because I am tired of moving around and this seems like a good place to stop, Ryan said simply. And because you seem like a decent person who has had some hard luck. I know what that is like. Sarah wanted to say yes. She desperately needed help, and there was something about Ryan that made her feel like she could trust him. But she was also aware of the impropriety of a single woman living alone with a single man, even in the harsh reality of the frontier where practical considerations often outweighed social niceties. People would talk, she said finally. People are going to talk anyway, Ryan pointed out. Seems to me they already do. He did not say it cruelly, but Sarah flushed anyway, knowing he was right. The people of Kingman already gossiped about her height and her unmarried status and her living alone. What difference would it make if they added one more thing to the list? There is a small bunkhouse out back, she said slowly. It is not much, but it has a roof and walls. That is more than I have got now, Ryan said with a smile. So we have a deal. Sarah hesitated one more moment, then nodded. We have a deal. Ryan moved his few belongings into the bunkhouse that very night. Over the following weeks, Sarah discovered that hiring him, or rather taking him on, was the best decision she could have made. Ryan was an excellent worker, rising before dawn and rarely stopping until after sunset. He repaired things Sarah had not even realized were broken, reorganized the barn for better efficiency, and taught her techniques for managing the cattle that her father had never known. But more than his skills as a ranch hand, Sarah appreciated his company. Ryan talked to her like an equal, asking her opinions on ranch decisions and listening to her answers. He never once commented on her height, never looked at her with pity or disgust, never made her feel like anything other than a capable partner in running the ranch. They fell into an easy routine. Sarah would prepare breakfast while Ryan saw to the animals. They would work together throughout the day, breaking for a simple lunch and then continuing until evening. Supper was another shared meal, and afterward they would often sit on the porch and watch the sun set, talking about everything and nothing. One evening, about 2 months after Ryan's arrival, they were sitting on the porch when a rider approached. It was one of the men from town, a rancher named Pete Simmons who owned the spread adjacent to Sarah's. "Evening," Simmons said, not bothering to dismount. He looked at Ryan with open suspicion. "Heard you had hired help, Sarah. Wanted to come see for myself." "This is Ryan Keller," Sarah said evenly. "He is helping me run the ranch." "That's so," Simmons said, his tone making it clear what he thought of the arrangement. "Seems mighty convenient, a young man and a woman living out here alone." Sarah felt her face burn with anger and humiliation, but before she could respond, Ryan stood up. He was still several inches shorter than Sarah, but there was something in his posture that made him seem larger. "Seems to me that what Miss Foster does on her own property is her own business," Ryan said quietly. "And it seems mighty rude to come onto someone's land and insult them." Simmons sputtered. "Now see here, I am just looking out for Sarah's reputation. A woman alone needs to be careful about these things." "I am not alone," Sarah said, finding her voice. "And my reputation is my concern, not yours. Thank you for your interest, Mr. Simmons, but I will ask you to leave now." After Simmons rode away, muttering under his breath, Sarah sank back into her chair. "I am sorry about that. I warned you people would talk." "You have got nothing to apologize for," Ryan said firmly. "He is the one who should be ashamed, coming out here with his insinuations." "It will get worse," Sarah said quietly. "The gossip, I mean, it always does." Ryan was quiet for a moment. "Does it bother you what they say?" "It used to," Sarah admitted. "When I was younger, I cared desperately what people thought. I wanted so badly to fit in, to be like the other girls. But I was always too tall, too different. After a while, I stopped caring, or at least I told myself I did." "What about now?" Ryan asked gently. Sarah looked at him, this man who had appeared in her life like an answer to a prayer she had been afraid to voice. "Now I care more about what the people close to me think, and there are precious few of those." The summer heat gave way to the cooler temperatures of autumn. The ranch was thriving under their combined efforts. The cattle were healthy and multiplying, the crops they had planted were yielding well, and there was even a little money left over after buying supplies. Sarah felt something she had not felt in a long time: hope. She also felt something else, something she was afraid to name. She found herself watching Ryan as he worked, admiring the easy way he moved and the concentration on his face. She looked forward to their evening conversations more than anything else in her day. She noticed little things about him, like the way he always made sure she had the more comfortable chair on the porch, or how he left wildflowers on the kitchen table sometimes, picked from the fields during his work. But Sarah was afraid to let herself hope for more than friendship. She had learned long ago that men did not look at her the way they looked at other women. She was too tall, too imposing, too different. Ryan was kind to her, but that did not mean he felt anything beyond professional respect and friendly affection. In early October, the town of Kingman held its annual harvest dance. Sarah had not attended in years, knowing it would only lead to more humiliation. But this year, several of the women from town had made a point of inviting her, and Sarah suspected they were more interested in gossiping about her living arrangement with Ryan than in actually including her. "Are you going to the dance?" Ryan asked one evening. Sarah shook her head. "I see no point. I will just stand against the wall while everyone else enjoys themselves." "Why would you stand against the wall?" "Because no man wants to dance with a woman who is taller than he is," Sarah said bluntly. "I learned that lesson years ago." Ryan was quiet for a long moment. "What if I asked you to dance? Would you go then?" Sarah's heart seemed to stop. "You do not have to do that. I know I am not the kind of woman men want to be seen with." "Says who?" Ryan demanded, and there was an edge to his voice that Sarah had never heard before. "Sarah, have you looked at yourself lately? I mean really looked. You are strong and capable and beautiful. Any man would be lucky to dance with you. Beautiful." He had called her beautiful. Sarah felt tears prick her eyes. "You are just being kind." "I am being honest," Ryan said firmly. He stood up and walked over to where she sat. "Stand up." Confused, Sarah stood. As always, she towered over him, her eyes level with his forehead. She expected him to step back, to put distance between them. Instead, Ryan took her hands in his. "I have been wanting to say something for a while now, but I was not sure how you would take it," he said, looking up at her. "These past few months working with you, getting to know you, they have been the best of my life. You are the strongest, smartest, most incredible woman I have ever met. And I do not give a damn that you are taller than I am. In fact, I think it is part of what makes you so amazing." Sarah could hardly breathe. "Ryan, I do not understand. Are you saying—" "I am saying that I would be honored to take you to that dance," Ryan said. "And I do not care who sees us or what they say. I care about you, Sarah, more than I have ever cared about anyone." "But I am so tall," Sarah whispered, voicing the fear that had haunted her entire adult life. "You will look ridiculous standing next to me." "Then I will look ridiculous," Ryan said simply. "But I will be standing next to the woman I love, so I will also be the luckiest man alive." Love. He loved her. Sarah felt something break open inside her, like a door she had kept locked for so long finally swinging wide. "You love me." "I do," Ryan confirmed. "I have been trying to figure out how to tell you for weeks. I was afraid you would send me away." "Send you away?" Sarah laughed through her tears. "Ryan, I love you too. I have been so afraid to hope that you could feel the same way." Ryan squeezed her hands. "Then say you will go to the dance with me. Let me show this whole town that you are mine and I am yours." Sarah wanted to say yes more than anything, but fear held her back. "They will mock us. They will say terrible things." "Let them," Ryan said fiercely. "Their words cannot hurt us unless we let them. Sarah, I am tired of living my life based on what other people think. I want to live it with you, tall, short, or any other way you come. So what do you say?" Sarah looked down at this man who was shorter than her, who had to crane his neck to meet her eyes, and who loved her anyway. Who loved her not in spite of her height but including it, as part of the whole person she was. She thought about all the years she had spent hiding, all the dances she had missed, all the opportunities for joy she had denied herself because she was afraid of ridicule. "Yes," she said firmly. "Yes, I will go to the dance with you." Ryan's face split into a wide grin. "Good. But there is one thing we should practice first." "What is that?" "Dancing," Ryan said. "We should make sure we know what we are doing before we face the crowd." Sarah laughed. "I do not think I even remember how to dance. It has been so long." "Then we will learn together," Ryan said. He pulled her toward the center of the porch, positioning her hands properly for a waltz. "Now, normally the man leads, but I think in our case, you might need to help steer. I cannot see over your shoulder to know where we are going." They both laughed at that, and then Ryan began to hum a waltz tune. They moved awkwardly at first, both of them trying to find the rhythm and figure out how to dance with such a height difference. Sarah kept wanting to hunch down, to try to make herself smaller, but Ryan would have none of it. "Stand up straight," he insisted. "You are perfect just as you are. I will adjust to you, not the other way around." So Sarah straightened her spine and held her head high, and they continued to practice. After a while, they found their rhythm. It was different from how other couples danced, certainly, with Sarah having to look down and Ryan having to look up, but it worked. They glided across the porch as the sun set, lost in their own world. When the music stopped, they stood there holding each other, and Sarah felt a happiness so profound it almost hurt. Ryan was looking up at her with such love in his eyes that she felt like she might float away. "I want to kiss you," Ryan said softly, "but I am going to need some help. You are quite far away from down here." Sarah laughed and started to bend down, but Ryan shook his head. "No, you stay where you are." He looked around and spotted a sturdy wooden box they used for various chores. He dragged it over and stepped up onto it, bringing him almost to Sarah's height. "That is better." Standing on his toes on top of the box, Ryan cupped Sarah's face in his hands and kissed her. It was gentle and sweet, and everything Sarah had ever dreamed a first kiss could be. When they parted, both of them were smiling. "We are going to scandalize the entire town," Sarah said. "Good," Ryan replied. "It is about time those people learned that love comes in all sizes." The night of the dance arrived. Sarah put on her best dress, a deep blue cotton that her mother had made years ago. It was simple but well made, and it fit her tall frame better than most of her clothes. She braided her long brown hair and pinned it up, and when she looked at herself in the small mirror, she saw something she had not seen in a long time. A woman who felt beautiful. Ryan cleaned up well too, washing the dust from his face and hair and putting on a clean shirt and his better pants. He offered Sarah his arm as they climbed into the wagon, and they rode into Kingman as the sun was setting. The dance was being held in the largest building in town, a meeting hall that served multiple purposes. Music was already playing when they arrived, and through the windows, Sarah could see couples twirling on the dance floor. Her courage almost failed her, but Ryan squeezed her hand. "Together," he said simply. They walked in together, and the room seemed to go silent. Every eye turned to them, taking in Sarah's impressive height and Ryan's more modest stature. Sarah heard the whispers start immediately. "Look at them. It is like a circus act. That poor man, how embarrassing for him. What does he see in her? She is built like a man." Sarah felt her face burn, and she started to turn back toward the door. But Ryan held firm to her hand. "Do not," he said quietly. "Do not give them the power to drive you away. You belong here as much as anyone." The music started up again, a lively waltz, and couples returned to dancing, though Sarah could feel their eyes still on her and Ryan. Ryan led her to the dance floor, and several couples actually stopped dancing to watch. "Ready?" Ryan asked. "As I will ever be," Sarah replied. They began to dance, and it was immediately apparent to everyone watching that they were not a conventional couple. Sarah had to look down at Ryan, and he had to crane his neck to see up at her. But they moved together with a grace that came from practice and genuine affection. Ryan did not seem embarrassed or bothered by the height difference. If anything, he seemed proud to be dancing with Sarah. As they twirled across the floor, Sarah gradually stopped noticing the stares. She lost herself in the music and in the feeling of Ryan's hands holding hers. They danced through one song and then another, and gradually, other couples resumed their own dancing. the novelty of Sarah and Ryan wearing off. During a break in the music, they went to get some punch. Mrs. Henderson, the woman Sarah had mentioned to her father weeks ago, approached them with a warm smile. "Sarah, how lovely to see you here," she said genuinely. "And you must be Mr. Keller. I have heard you have been helping Sarah with her ranch." "Yes, madam," Ryan said politely. "It is a fine piece of property." "Indeed it is," Mrs. Henderson agreed. She looked between them with knowing eyes. "You two make a handsome couple." It was the first kind thing anyone in town had said, and Sarah felt tears threaten. "Thank you," she managed. As Mrs. Henderson walked away, Ryan leaned close to Sarah. "See, not everyone is cruel." "One person out of 100, Sarah said, but she was smiling. They danced several more dances, and with each one Sarah felt more confident. She stopped hunching, stopped trying to make herself smaller. She was tall, yes, but that was not something to be ashamed of. Ryan loved her as she was, and that was what mattered. Toward the end of the evening, a man approached them. It was Pete Simmons, the rancher who had come to Sarah's property weeks ago with his insinuations. He looked uncomfortable but determined. "Miss Foster, Mr. Keller," he said, nodding to each of them. "I wanted to apologize for my behavior when I came to your ranch. It was rude and uncalled for. I can see now that I misjudged the situation." Sarah was so surprised she could hardly speak, but Ryan stepped in smoothly. "Apology accepted," he said. "Water under the bridge." After Simmons walked away, Sarah whispered to Ryan, "What brought that on?" "Maybe seeing us happy together made him realize he was wrong to judge," Ryan suggested. "Or maybe his wife told him he was being an ass. Either way, I will take it." They stayed until the dance ended, and as they rode home under a sky full of stars, Sarah felt a contentment she had never experienced before. Ryan had his arm around her shoulders, and she leaned her head against his. "Thank you," she said softly. "For what?" "For seeing me," Sarah said. "Really seeing me, not just my height or what other people say about me, for loving me." "That is the easiest thing I have ever done," Ryan replied. The weeks following the dance brought changes to how the townspeople treated Sarah. It was not a complete transformation. There were still people who whispered and stared, still people who thought a woman of her height with a shorter man was some sort of spectacle. But there were others, like Mrs. Henderson, who began to treat Sarah with more warmth and respect. Having Ryan by her side and his obvious devotion to her seemed to make her more acceptable somehow. Sarah found she did not care as much about the opinions of strangers anymore. Ryan's love had given her a confidence she had never possessed before. She walked through town with her head high, not hunching or trying to minimize herself. She was who she was, and that was enough. As winter approached, Ryan and Sarah discussed the future of the ranch. They had been working together for nearly 6 months, and the place was more prosperous than it had been in years. One evening in November, as they sat by the fire to ward off the chill, Ryan brought up a subject they had been dancing around. "Sarah, we need to talk about us," he said. Sarah's heart skipped a beat. "What about us?" "Well, the way I see it, we have got a few options," Ryan said, taking her hand. "We could keep going the way we are, which is fine, but people will continue to talk. Or we could make this official." "Official," Sarah repeated, hardly daring to hope. Ryan slid off his chair and got down on one knee in front of where she sat. Even on his knees, he had to look up at her, and the image would have been comical if the moment had not been so profound. "Sarah Foster, I love you more than I thought it was possible to love another person. You are my partner, my best friend, and the person I want to spend the rest of my life with. I know I am not the tallest man, and I know people will always have something to say about us. But I do not care about any of that. I only care about you. Will you marry me?" Tears were streaming down Sarah's face. "Yes," she said, her voice breaking. Yes, of course I will marry you." Ryan stood up and pulled her into his arms, and they held each other tightly. When they finally parted, both of them were laughing and crying at the same time. "I do not have a ring yet," Ryan admitted. "I wanted to ask you first, make sure you would say yes before I spent money we need for the ranch." "I do not need a ring," Sarah said. "I just need you." But Ryan shook his head. "You deserve a ring. You deserve everything. We will go to town tomorrow and get you a proper one." True to his word, the next day they rode into Kingman and visited the jeweler. The selection was limited, but they found a simple gold band with a small garnet that fit Sarah's long finger perfectly. The jeweler, an older man named Mr. Abrams, congratulated them warmly. "It is good to see young people in love," he said. "Reminds me of when I married my wife, rest her soul. Do not let anyone tell you that you are not a perfect match. Love is love, no matter what form it takes." News of their engagement spread through Kingman quickly. Most people offered congratulations, though Sarah could tell some of them were less than sincere. But she found she truly did not care anymore. She was marrying the man she loved, and no amount of gossip could diminish her joy. They decided to have a simple wedding in early December, before the worst of the winter weather set in. The ceremony would be at the small church in Kingman, with the reception afterward at their ranch. Sarah had no family left to invite, and Ryan's family was long gone, but they had made friends among some of the neighboring ranchers and townspeople who genuinely wished them well. Sarah spent the weeks before the wedding preparing. She sewed herself a new dress, a beautiful cream-colored cotton with lace at the collar and cuffs. Mrs. Henderson helped her, showing up at the ranch several times to assist with the fitting and to offer advice. The older woman had become something of a friend, and Sarah was grateful for her kindness. "You are going to be a beautiful bride," Mrs. Henderson said as she pinned the hem of the dress. "That Ryan is a lucky man." "I am the lucky one," Sarah said. "I never thought I would find someone who could love me as I am." "Nonsense," Mrs. Henderson said briskly. "You are a wonderful woman, Sarah. It just took the right man to see it. Ryan is not intimidated by your strength or your height. That makes him special." The day of the wedding arrived, cold but clear. Sarah dressed carefully in her new gown, and Mrs. Henderson came to the ranch early to help her with her hair. She wove small white flowers through Sarah's braids and pinned them into an elegant style that made Sarah feel like a princess. When Sarah looked at herself in the mirror, she hardly recognized the confident, happy woman staring back at her. This was so different from the shy, hunched girl who had spent years trying to make herself invisible. The ceremony was simple but lovely. The small church was decorated with pine boughs and candles, filling the space with a warm glow. Ryan stood at the altar in his best suit, looking nervous and excited. When Sarah walked down the aisle, his face lit up with such joy that she felt her own heart swell in response. The preacher kept the ceremony short, knowing that the church was cold and people wanted to get to the reception and the food. When it came time for Ryan to kiss his bride, there was a moment of awkward logistics. Ryan was standing on the ground, and Sarah was on the single step up to the altar area, making her even taller than usual. Without hesitation, Ryan stepped up onto his toes and leaned up. Sarah met him halfway, bending down slightly, and they kissed to the applause of the assembled guests. Someone in the back laughed, but it was a good-natured sound, not cruel. After the ceremony, everyone traveled to the ranch for the reception. Sarah and Ryan had cleared out the barn and decorated it with lanterns and more pine boughs. There was food and music, and despite the cold, people seemed to be having a good time. As the evening wore on, Sarah and Ryan danced together in the barn, surrounded by friends and well-wishers. Sarah no longer cared that she was so much taller, that Ryan had to crane his neck to look at her, that they must look odd to outside observers. All that mattered was the love between them and the life they were building together. Late in the evening, when most of the guests had left and the barn was quiet, Ryan and Sarah stood together looking out at their ranch. The moon was full, bathing everything in silver light. "What are you thinking?" Ryan asked. "I am thinking that a year ago, I never could have imagined being this happy," Sarah said. "I thought I would spend my whole life alone, being mocked and pitied. And now I have you, and I have a real home, and I have hope for the future." "We have hope for the future," Ryan corrected gently. "This is our life now together. Everything we do as a team." "I like the sound of that," Sarah said. They went to bed that night as husband and wife, and Sarah felt a sense of belonging that had eluded her entire life. She was exactly where she was meant to be. The winter passed quietly. Sarah and Ryan worked together to keep the ranch running, caring for the animals and making repairs as needed. The cold weather kept them close to home most of the time, and Sarah found she did not mind. She enjoyed the quiet evenings by the fire, the simple pleasure of cooking meals for her husband, the warmth of sleeping beside him at night. In the spring, Sarah discovered she was pregnant. She told Ryan one morning over breakfast, and his reaction was everything she could have hoped for. He jumped up from the table, pulled her into his arms, and spun her around despite the fact that she was significantly heavier and taller than he was. "We are having a baby," he shouted, his joy echoing through the house. "Sarah, we are having a baby." "Careful," she laughed, though she was crying too. "You will hurt yourself trying to lift me." "I do not care," Ryan said, but he set her down gently anyway. "This is the best news, the absolute best news." As Sarah's pregnancy progressed, Ryan became even more attentive and protective. He would not let her lift anything heavy, insisted she rest more, and generally fussed over her in a way that was both endearing and sometimes frustrating. But Sarah knew it came from a place of love, so she tolerated it with good humor. Her pregnancy was not easy. Morning sickness plagued her for months, and as the baby grew, Sarah's already tall frame became ungainly in new ways. She felt like a giant, lumbering around the ranch, unable to do many of the tasks that had once been simple. But Ryan was patient and kind, taking over the heavier work without complaint. In October, exactly 1 year after Ryan had proposed, Sarah went into labor. Mrs. Henderson came to help, along with the doctor from town. The labor was long and difficult, lasting nearly 20 hours. Sarah had never experienced such pain, and there were moments when she was certain she could not continue. But Ryan stayed by her side the entire time, holding her hand and encouraging her. When the baby finally came, a healthy boy with a strong set of lungs, Sarah wept with relief and joy. "He is perfect," Ryan said, cradling his son carefully. "Absolutely perfect." They named him Thomas after Sarah's father. Little Thomas was a beautiful baby, and he seemed to have inherited his mother's height. Even as an infant, he was longer than average, and the doctor predicted he would be a tall man someday. "Let us hope he has better luck with it than I did," Sarah said, but she was smiling. As Thomas grew, it became apparent that he had indeed inherited Sarah's height genes. By the time he was 2, he was the size of a 4-year-old. But he was growing up in a household where height was not something to be ashamed of. Sarah and Ryan made sure their son knew he was loved exactly as he was, tall or short or anything in between. When Thomas was 3, Sarah became pregnant again. This pregnancy was easier than the first, and in the spring of 1886, she gave birth to a daughter. They named her Grace, and she was as petite as her brother was large, taking after Ryan's side of the family in stature. Sarah and Ryan now had 2 children, a thriving ranch, and a love that had only deepened over the years. The people of Kingman had long since grown accustomed to seeing the tall woman and her shorter husband together. What had once been scandalous was now simply part of the fabric of the community. Sometimes, new people would come to town and stare at Sarah and Ryan, commenting on their height difference. But Sarah had learned not to care. She had Ryan's love, her children's laughter, and a life she had built through hard work and determination. What strangers thought of her appearance was irrelevant. One evening, when Thomas was 5 and Grace was 2, the family sat on the porch together watching the sunset. Thomas was chattering about something that had happened with the chickens, and Grace was playing with a rag doll Ryan had made for her. Sarah leaned against her husband's shoulder, feeling utterly content. "You ever regret it?" she asked quietly, so the children would not hear. "Regret what?" Ryan asked. "Marrying me, dealing with all the stares and comments, having to stand on your toes to kiss me," Sarah said, only half joking. Ryan turned to look at her, his expression serious. "Not for one single second. Sarah, you are the best thing that ever happened to me. You gave me a home, a family, a purpose. I would stand on my toes for the rest of my life if it meant getting to be with you." Sarah kissed him, not caring that she had to bend down and he had to stretch up to make it work. They had found their own way of doing things, a way that worked for them regardless of what anyone else thought. As the years passed, the Keller ranch continued to prosper. Ryan proved to be an excellent rancher and businessman, and Sarah was his equal partner in every way. They expanded their herd, bought some of the adjacent land, and became one of the more successful operations in the area. Thomas grew into a tall, strong young man who worked alongside his father on the ranch. At 18, he stood 6 feet 4 inches tall, even taller than his mother, but he wore his height with confidence. His parents had taught him that being different was not something to hide but something to embrace. Grace, who topped out at 5 feet 3 inches, was small but fierce. She had her mother's determination and her father's easy charm, and she could ride and rope as well as any of the ranch hands they employed. Sarah and Ryan watched their children grow with pride. They had built something lasting, not just a successful ranch but a family grounded in love and mutual respect. The challenges they had faced, because of their physical differences, seemed small in retrospect, overcome by the strength of their commitment to each other. On their 20th wedding anniversary, Ryan took Sarah back to Kingman for a celebration. The town had grown over the years with more buildings and more people, but some things remained the same. The church where they had married still stood, and the meeting hall where they had danced that first time was still used for community gatherings. They attended a dance that evening, just as they had all those years ago. Sarah wore a new dress, dark green this time, and Ryan wore his best suit. When they walked into the hall, there were no shocked stares, no cruel whispers. They were simply Ryan and Sarah Keller, respected members of the community who had proven that love transcended physical expectations. They danced together, Ryan still having to look up at Sarah, Sarah still having to look down at Ryan. But it was their dance, the one they had perfected over 20 years of marriage. They moved together with the ease of long practice, two people who knew each other so well that height was irrelevant. During a break in the music, several couples came over to congratulate them on their anniversary. Mrs. Henderson, now quite elderly but still sharp as a tack, hugged them both. "I knew from the first moment I saw you two together that you were meant to be," she said. "You have built a beautiful life together." "We have been blessed," Sarah agreed. As the evening drew to a close, Ryan and Sarah stood outside under the stars, just as they had on their wedding night. Ryan took Sarah's hand and squeezed it gently. 20 years, he said wonderingly. Where did the time go? Into the ranch, into our children, into building this life, Sarah said. I would not change a single moment. Not even the hard times, Ryan asked. Especially not the hard times, Sarah said firmly. They made us stronger. They taught us what really matters. Ryan pulled her close, stretching up to kiss her as he had done thousands of times before. I love you, Sarah Keller, today, tomorrow, and forever. I love you too, Sarah replied. My wonderful husband who has to stand on his toes to kiss me and does not care who knows it. They both laughed, the sound carrying on the night air. It was a good laugh, full of joy and satisfaction and the deep contentment that comes from a life well lived. In the years that followed, Sarah and Ryan continued to work the ranch together. They saw Thomas marry a lovely young woman who was nearly as tall as he was, a match that delighted Sarah to no end. Grace eventually married as well, choosing a man who was several inches shorter than her, just like her mother had. It seems to be a family tradition, Ryan joked when Grace announced her engagement. Sarah watched her daughter navigate the same questions and stares she had once faced, but with far more confidence. Grace had grown up knowing that height did not determine worth, that love could transcend physical differences. She faced the world with her head high, just as her mother had learned to do. As Sarah entered her 50s, the hard work of ranching began to take its toll on her body. Her back ached from years of lifting and bending, and her hands were gnarled from decades of manual labor, but she had no regrets. She had lived a full, rich life, filled with love and purpose. Ryan, too, showed the signs of age. His sandy brown hair had turned mostly gray, and he moved a bit slower than he once had. But his eyes still lit up when he looked at Sarah, and he still stretched up on his toes to kiss her every morning and every night. They spent more time on the porch now, watching the sun set and remembering. They talked about the early days when they had been so young and uncertain. They marveled at how far they had come, from a struggling ranch and two lonely people to a thriving enterprise and a family filled with love. One evening, Sarah said something that had been on her mind for a while. I want to thank you, Ryan. For what? He asked, as he always did when she thanked him. For seeing me when no one else did. For loving me when I did not think anyone could. For standing on your toes to kiss me and never once acting like it was a burden. You gave me a life I never dreamed possible. Ryan took her hand, his touch as familiar as her own heartbeat. You gave me the same thing, Sarah. Before I met you, I was just drifting, looking for a place to belong. You gave me a home. You gave me love. You gave me a reason to stop running and start living. They sat in comfortable silence as the stars began to appear in the darkening sky. They had said everything that needed to be said, shared everything that needed to be shared. After more than 40 years together, they understood each other without words. Sarah looked back on her life and saw the arc of it clearly. She had started as a girl who hated her height, who hunched her shoulders and avoided social gatherings because she was different. She had endured mockery and loneliness, convinced that she would never find acceptance or love. And then Ryan had appeared, a cowboy of modest height who saw past the surface to the woman beneath. He had loved her not in spite of her height, but including it, as part of the whole complex, wonderful person she was. He had shown her that she did not need to change herself to be worthy of love. She just needed to find someone who appreciated her as she was. Together, they had built a life that defied the expectations and limitations others had tried to place on them. They had raised children who were confident in themselves, who knew that physical differences were nothing to be ashamed of. They had created a legacy of love and acceptance that would continue through their children and grandchildren. On a warm summer evening in 1907, Sarah and Ryan sat on their porch for the last time together. Ryan had been ill for several weeks, his heart growing weaker. The doctor had said there was nothing to be done except make him comfortable. Sarah had moved his bed to the main room so he could look out the window at the ranch he loved. But on this evening, Ryan had insisted on getting up, on going outside one more time. Sarah had helped him, supporting his weight as they walked slowly to the porch. They sat in their customary chairs, holding hands and watching the familiar sunset. "It is beautiful, is it not?" Ryan said softly. "It is," Sarah agreed, though her eyes were on him, not the sunset. "I have had a good life," Ryan said, "better than I ever deserved, and it is all because of you." "We made it together," Sarah said, tears running down her face. "Everything good in my life came from you." Ryan squeezed her hand weakly. "Do not cry, my love. We have had more years together than most people get. We have built something that will last long after we are gone." "I am not ready to lose you," Sarah whispered. "You will never lose me," Ryan said. "I will always be with you in every sunset, in every fence post we repaired together, in the faces of our children and grandchildren. We are woven together now, you and I. Death cannot change that." They sat together as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and purple. When the last light faded and the stars began to appear, Ryan took his final breath, his hand still clasped in Sarah's. Sarah sat with him for a long time, not moving, not speaking. She held his hand and remembered everything they had shared, every moment, every laugh, every kiss. The cowboy who had to stand on his toes to kiss her, who had loved her when no one else would, who had given her a life beyond her wildest dreams. Eventually, Thomas came looking for them. He had been staying at the ranch to help his mother care for his father. When he saw them sitting together, his father's face peaceful in death, his mother's face wet with tears, he understood immediately. "Mama," he said gently, touching her shoulder. "He is gone," Sarah said, her voice surprisingly steady. "Your father is gone." They buried Ryan on a hillside overlooking the ranch with a simple marker that read, "Ryan Keller, beloved husband and father, 1854–1907. The funeral was well attended, with people coming from all over the territory to pay their respects. Ryan had been loved and respected, not for his height or appearance but for his character and kindness. Sarah stood tall at the graveside, her children and grandchildren around her. She did not cry during the service, though her heart felt like it was breaking. She knew Ryan would want her to be strong, to honor their life together by continuing to live fully. In the months that followed, Sarah learned to live without the man who had been her partner for more than 4 decades. It was hard, harder than anything she had ever done. But she was not alone. Her children visited regularly, and she found comfort in working the ranch, in the familiar rhythms of the life she and Ryan had built together. She often sat on the porch in the evenings, in the chair next to the one that was now empty. She talked to Ryan sometimes, telling him about her day, sharing news of the children and grandchildren. She liked to think he could hear her, that some part of him still lingered in the place they had loved so much. One evening, Grace came to visit with her 3 children. They found Sarah on the porch, as usual, watching the sunset. "Mama, are you all right?" Grace asked, concern in her voice. Sarah smiled. "I am more than all right. I am grateful. Your father gave me such a gift, Grace. He taught me to love myself, to stand tall and proud. He showed me that real love sees the person, not just the package they come in. I had 45 years with the love of my life." How many people can say that? Grace sat down beside her mother and they watched the sunset together. "Tell me again how he proposed," Grace said. "I love that story." So Sarah told the story as she had told it many times before. She described how Ryan had gotten down on one knee and looked up at her with love in his eyes. How he had said he did not care about their height difference, did not care what people thought. How he had loved her completely and without reservation. As she spoke, Sarah could almost see Ryan there beside her, could almost feel his hand in hers. The pain of loss was still there, still sharp, but so was the joy of remembering. They had had something special, something that transcended the physical world. Sarah lived for another 5 years after Ryan's death. She remained active and engaged with the ranch and her family. She met her great-grandchildren, delighting in each new addition. She maintained the property with the help of her children, making sure the legacy she and Ryan had built would continue. On a spring morning in 1912, Sarah woke feeling different. There was a lightness to her, a sense of anticipation she had not felt in years. She got up slowly, her aging body protesting, and made her way to the porch. The sun was just rising, painting the sky in soft pastels. Sarah sat in her customary chair and looked out at the ranch. She saw everything she and Ryan had created together, the sturdy fences, the healthy cattle, the house they had expanded over the years. She saw the evidence of their love in every corner of the property. As the sun rose higher, Sarah felt a warmth spreading through her. She was not afraid. She knew what was happening and she welcomed it. She had lived a full life, a good life, a life filled with more love than she had ever thought possible. She closed her eyes and let herself remember. She remembered the first time she saw Ryan, being thrown out of the saloon but walking away with dignity. She remembered him helping her with the fence, teaching her without condescension. She remembered their first dance, their first kiss, the day he proposed. She remembered their wedding, the birth of their children, every sunset they had watched together. And she remembered the most important thing. She remembered being loved. Truly, deeply, completely loved by a man who saw past her height, past her difference, past everything that made her feel unworthy. Ryan had seen her soul, and he had loved what he found there. Thomas found her later that morning, sitting peacefully in her chair, a small smile on her face. She had passed quietly, without pain, looking out at the ranch she loved. They buried Sarah next to Ryan on the hillside, under a marker that read, Sarah Foster Keller, beloved wife and mother, 1859–1912. At the funeral, her children and grandchildren shared stories of her strength, her kindness, her unwavering love for their father. They were a perfect match, Thomas said during the service. Not because they looked right together, but because they understood each other. They taught us that love is not about physical appearance or meeting society's expectations. It is about seeing someone for who they truly are and loving them completely. The ranch remained in the Keller family for generations. Each new generation heard the story of Sarah and Ryan, the tall woman and the cowboy who had to stand on his toes to kiss her. It became a family legend, a reminder that love transcends all boundaries. In the town of Kingman, which grew from a small frontier settlement to a thriving city, people still told the story of Sarah and Ryan. The couple who had defied expectations, who had built a life and a legacy based on mutual respect and genuine love. They became an example, proof that what makes us different can also make us beautiful. And somewhere, in whatever comes after this life, Sarah and Ryan were together again. He did not have to stand on his toes anymore to kiss her, and she did not have to bend down. They were simply two souls who had found each other across the vastness of existence, who had loved each other completely, and who would remain together for eternity. Their story was one of mockery overcome by love, of difference embraced rather than hidden, of two people who chose each other despite what the world said they should do. It was a story of courage and commitment, of laughter and joy, of a love that grew stronger with each passing year. It was a story of the Wild West, yes, but more than that, it was a story of the human heart, of its capacity for love, for growth, for finding beauty in unexpected places. It was a reminder that sometimes the perfect match comes in an imperfect package, and that real love sees beyond the surface to the treasure beneath. Sarah and Ryan's love story lived on long after they were gone, passed down through generations, inspiring others to look past appearances and societal expectations. It reminded people that true love is not about conforming to what others think you should be, but about finding someone who loves you exactly as you are. And in the end, that is what Sarah had found with Ryan. A man who loved her not in spite of her height, but as a complete person of whom her height was just one part. A man who stood on his toes to kiss her and felt like the luckiest man alive for the privilege. A man who saw her when no one else did, who valued her when others dismissed her, who loved her when she thought she was unlovable. Together, they had built more than a ranch. They had built a testament to the power of love to transform lives, to heal wounds, to make the impossible possible. They had shown that what the world sees as limitations can become strengths when embraced with confidence and supported by genuine love. Their legacy lived on in their descendants, in the ranch that still bore their name, in the stories told around dinner tables and at family gatherings. The tall woman and her cowboy, who had to stand on his toes to kiss her, who had loved each other through every challenge, who had built a beautiful life together against all odds. It was a love story for the ages, set against the harsh beauty of the Arizona Territory in the days of the Wild West. But at its heart, it was simply the story of two people who found each other, chose each other, and loved each other completely. And in the end, what could be more beautiful than that?